How'd you like that cold open? Not bad, right?
大分引き立ての抹茶をアメリカで
Welcome to Ooika. In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between matcha ground on this small home-turned stone mill versus matcha ground on this beast, real commercial-sized stone. And see what the differences between these are, and most importantly, how does the matcha taste between them? This is called an Ishi Usu, or quite simply a stone mill. This is for grinding tea leaves into matcha powder. Now, in theory, yes, you could put any kind of tea leaves into this and grind it into powdered tea, but this is specifically designed to grind matcha. What exactly is matcha? Well, to be matcha, there are at least 3 properties it needs to have. First, it must be from Japan. You can take green tea from anywhere in the world and grind it. It's not matcha unless it's from Japan. That's very important. Just like if you take champagne, champagne can't be from Spain. Champagne can only be from Champagne, France. Secondly, the tea leaves that go into this are called tencha, and tencha, to be tencha, must be unrolled. In making green tea, the tea leaves are, in one part of the process, rolled or crushed to break the cell walls. We do that so when you put it in liquid, all of the cell walls are broken, so everything comes out into the infusion and you drink it. But with matcha, you're actually not drinking it so much as you're eating the entire leaf, so there's no purpose in breaking the cell walls. A side effect of that is because you're not breaking the cell walls, you can actually age matcha, and that is a topic for another day. Next up, the tea bushes that we're making our ground tea powder matcha into must be shaded before they're harvesting. They literally block out the sun and shade them for anywhere from 20 to, in some cases, 45 or even longer days. That shading process has a bunch of different effects on the tea, makes it taste more savory, and I guess it makes it more colorful as well. In fact, click up there, I have a full dedicated video on the topic of shading, specifically L-theanine, which is the chemical in tea that makes it taste savory and that we increase by shading it. We can't take any type of green tea, we grind it and expect to get matcha. It needs to be from tencha. Now this is tencha and it's actually somewhat unrefined. You can see that there's a number of these stems and veins. All of the veins and stems are removed from the tea. So why is it not done here? Because this is from the tea farmer. And one of the jobs of the manufacturer, me, is to do something called shitate. Shitate is literally removing the stems. Now, removing all of these stems and veins is as tedious as you might expect, but there are tools and techniques that ease the burden. If you tried to drink this by making a tea bag out of it, it wouldn't have very much taste because the cell walls are unbroken, which is actually fairly interesting because when you make the matcha, matcha is so intense in flavor and you taste this and you think, how could this be matcha? Turns out that milling tea, I should say, is not a Japanese original practice. The practice started in China when tea was ground into powder before being drunk. That tradition is from the Song Dynasty. And back then, a product known as mocha was what people drank. And if you think that mocha sounds a lot like matcha, you'd be right. The process of grinding tea to make mocha or matcha basically fell out of favor in China and they adopted loose leaf style tea brewing. Eventually the Japanese did as well, but the Japanese decided, hey, this matcha thing, I think we're gonna keep it. But way back in the day when the Japanese monks would have these mills, matcha would be milled immediately before drinking your matcha. Today, matcha is ground commercially at big factories and warehouses, and in some cases at shops like mine. And as a result, most of that tea powder is put into bags, sent overseas on cargo ships, is sitting around in warehouses. And by the time you drink it, it might be months or in some cases even years old. Now you're not gonna get sick by drinking matcha that's 6 months old, but there is an immediate drop off in the freshness between, fresh ground and 30 days later. There's a noticeable decrease. And by 6 months, you've lost 30% of the antioxidant potential of matcha, which we know is quite high. And a lot of people drink matcha because of that.
大分だよ
Next time. look at the anatomy of this mill and see what's the hubbub. So you can see we have the bottom stone here, the top stone on top. We have a handle to turn it, and we also have a little cup that will catch all of the matcha. This stone, by the way, is designed by a man named Yoshida-san. And we can see with this mill, there are 6 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they have these little lines that are carved in with a center post known as a shinge. The tea will sit here and slowly it will get ground and the tea will be pushed to the edge. And then when it's at the edge, it will fall over. Now this surface of the mill is completely flat, level. Now we have the top stone. This is the one that sits at the top, and we'll look at the bottom of it here. First off, we can see that this is the hole here in the middle too with the center post. And we have this hole right here, which is the feed. So the tencha, the tea, will come through this hole. Now this top stone, even though it looks like it's perfectly flat and even, it's actually not. There's if you can think about it like this is the bottom stone. The top stone is almost like this. There's a wedge. That area in there is not perceivable by your hands or by your eyes. You're not going to be able to tell. The reason that exists is because when we're milling material, whether it's matcha or coffee beans or flour, we don't want to just have the tea leaves or the coffee bean or whatever go right into an area of 10 micron, because obviously it won't fit, it'll get jammed. So what you need to do is you need to start breaking down the material and have it slowly break down into the finest part. So to do that, this section here has a little bit more negative space. The only part of the stones that actually touch is this narrow little ring around the outside, about a couple millimeters wide. That's the only part that actually has contact with the stone, even though it seems like they're flush. So you can see there on my hand, that's a leaf of tencha. It's like paper thin. So the gap in between the bottom and the top stone will be 50% the thickness of this, paper thin sheet of tea. Okay, so we're actually gonna mill the matcha now. I'm really excited about this. Before I go on, let me just do a little commercial shout out. His work can exclusively be purchased through Ooika. So you can go to our website, and the link is in the description, and you can buy one of these stone mills where you can grind matcha fresh at home. First step is to make sure that the material is prepped. This material we can see has a lot of stems and veins, so we need to manually remove them. So you can easily just do it by hand, which I'm going to do right now on video. I'll do a time lapse now so you can see me remove everything quickly. This isn't perfect by any means, but that begs the question, does it need to be? What happens if we don't separate all of the stems and the veins from our tencha when we go to grind it into powder? Well, let's take a look. First off, we can see this is the result of me picking stuff out, and this is what I picked out. If you notice, right off the bat, there is a pretty big difference in color. The stems that I pick out are a lot more yellow and lifeless brown, where there's a more rich green hue to the tencha with all the stems removed. If we were to mill it with all of these stems in it and all the veins, we get a more muted final color. And with matcha, generally speaking, people want a bright neon green powder, sort of like this. The second thing that happens if we don't remove the stems and veins is, remember before we talked about there being a gap that's 50% the thickness of the tea leaf? Well, the stems and veins are thicker, so it widens that gap. And finally, and this only affects traditional stone mills, these mills are made out of a soft granite, very soft. They chip and they break pretty easily and they wear down over time. So if we put the stems and the veins in, which are usually pretty woody and hard, it'll over time wear the stones down faster. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take some of the tencha and we're gonna put it around the stone, just acting as lubrication. Now I'm gonna take my top stone and I'm gonna carefully put it on so the center post matches the hole in the center, and I'll put the handle in. The most important part of stone milling is making sure we're turning it in the right direction. We need to push it counterclockwise this way, which will cause the material to come out. As we turn it, we'll put a little bit of tea in. So I'm gonna turn it, and every time it turns, I'm gonna put a little bit more material in. We don't want to put too much in at one time, otherwise we'll kind of overload it. There is matcha coming out. For the purpose of this video, I'm just trying to get enough matcha to make a bowl of matcha. There we go. Oh man, the smell. It smells so good. And there's a gradient from dark to light. You'll also notice that when we look close, we can see these little speckles. Those speckles of white are the stems and veins that we missed. Okay, so I'm gonna scoop all of this into our bowl. Step one is we're gonna use 2 grams of matcha. And we're going to use a sifter to sift it through. This sifting is actually important. There might be little bristles of hair or little tiny pieces of stone or little pieces of stem that made it through. It's a little hard to see, but there are particulates that get left behind. So by doing the sifting, we can resolve that pretty easily. We'll add our water. And now we whisk it. And the goal with whisking here is to go back and forward without grinding or scratching the bottom of the bowl. And there we have our fresh ground matcha. It's so warming and fresh and clean and bright. These tones, the brightness and the cleanness, get lost over time. All right, guys, this stone is incredibly heavy. I'm gonna put it down here. So this is a full-size stone. This is the top stone, so there's another one of these which goes under it, that's the bottom stone. So I'm gonna put these side by side and we can do a little bit of a comparison between them. First off, we can see with this larger mill, there's 8 sections instead of 6. This is able to apply much more pressure. When you're grinding matcha, the tea leaves within the mill are pushing it. They're fighting. They're like pushing up against the top stone. So the more tea that you have in the mill, the more upward pressure there is, the less fine the matcha coming out will be. You'll notice that there is a section here where there's no carved lines. This is just plain flat. That's the part of the mill where it actually touches stone on stone. And at this point, you're getting matcha that goes through, tea leaves that go through that are getting ground into micron size, 5 to 10 micron size. All of this just means that when you mill with this big stone mill, you get a matcha powder that tastes more smooth than matcha from this small hand one. Matcha from the big mill will taste silky, where matcha from the smaller hand-turned mill will be a little bit more gritty, a little bit more coarse. Grooves. The stone mills have grooves that are etched in. And the question is, why? Why are there so few in this one and why are there so many in this? What do the grooves actually do? The grooves help move tea from the inside to the outside. So the more grooves we have, the more material we can push through the mill. The problem is, if we don't have enough grooves, we have the opposite problem. There's not enough material that gets moved through the mill. So there's sort of a Goldilocks zone where we have enough grooves to push material through the mill so it's efficient, and not too many grooves where we push too much material through the mill too fast. Because again, if we get too much material inside of the mill, the tea in the mill will push up. It'll literally push the stone mill up and reduce the pressure, the grinding pressure, meaning we get a less fine grind, which is why on the smaller mill here, there's less grooves on it because there's not as much weight to push down on the mill and get a smooth grind, which we would want from, well, any mill that we're using. So we have covered a lot today about the difference between these giant stone mills and these smaller handmade stone mills. You can learn more about Ooika and fresh ground matcha using full-scale commercial stone mills, ground fresh in the United States by me by going to ooika.co. You can look at the description below where you can learn more about them as well as flexible payment options if you want to try fresh ground matcha at your own house, only minutes old, which by the way is how it's been done for centuries. So I'll see you at the next one. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. And if you've ever tried fresh ground matcha before, leave a comment below because I'd be curious to think what you thought the difference was.
Ooikaです。